Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 286 or 286. Happy 2024. We're in a brand new year. This is going to be a big one for Random Encounter. We will be having our 300th episode in just a few months, which is pretty incredible to think that I've hosted this podcast for 300 episodes. No, I haven't. I've hosted it for, I don't actually know anymore, but I've only hosted it for about 2 years now. There is a long chain going back many, many years. I have trouble thinking of a lot of podcasts that go over 300 episodes, so that's incredibly exciting. Personally, I rung in my new year by upgrading my PC. I went from a 2600X to a 5800X 3D. I went from 16 gigabytes of RAM to 32 gigabytes, and I upgraded my graphics card from a GTX 1070 Ti to an RX 6950 XT. And I bought a ton of games that I couldn't previously play on my old system that I've been wanting to play for a while, like Cyberpunk 2077 2.0, Far Cry 6, and my most anticipated game in a long time, Alan Wake 2, which I was like, I'm just desperate to play it. And then on a whim, I also bought Power Wash Simulator. And guess which game I've been playing nonstop for the last few days? I upgraded my computer massively, and then I decided to play a game that could probably be run on an actual power washer. But it's really fun. It's really, really fun. And it's so mindless. You can just zone out and clean the RV or the helicopter or the house. I really like it. I really like it. I wouldn't call it a role-playing game, but I really like it. So yeah, the new year brought me a new PC, but it has also brought me my first two guests of 2024. First up, we have Jerry. Hey, Jer.
Howdy.
And we have Aleks.
Hello.
Did both of you have a good holiday season?
Wonderful. Time with the kids, playing games, got some cool artwork. Happy camper here.
That sounds lovely.
Mine was not quite as lovely. My entire family, myself included, got COVID.
That's the lump of coal in the stocking of the holidays.
Yeah. So it wasn't the most pleasant. We're gonna have like a makeup celebration in about a month.
That's
we're gonna
awesome.
have our proper like traditional Polish food, which we didn't make because we were too sick to, and that's gonna be great.
That's amazing. What do you make?
It's called barszczkami. It's like a similar idea to like regular borscht, but it's like a concentrate. And then we add to that pierogies, but instead of having like the regular kind of potato stuffing, we stuff them with mushrooms. Is the traditional way, like wild mushrooms, and it's quite delicious. It's like my favorite food in the world, and we only eat it once a year.
Something to look forward to, I guess.
Absolutely, Christmas is always a very pleasant party at the house for that reason.
And utter pandering to my guest, I will say that a few weeks ago, I made dill pickle soup for the first time.
Oh, no way. Oh, I love pickles. That sounds amazing.
I don't think I've ever had pickle soup.
It's Polish. I know that. And it is one of the strangest things I've ever eaten in my life. It's basically just, it's a basic chicken soup. Adam Ragusia on YouTube did a recipe for it a couple weeks ago, and I was like, wow, I love dill pickles more than anything. Surely this will be delicious. And I bought some Polish dill pickles, and it's, like I said, it's a pretty traditional chicken soup with like chicken and potatoes and celery, and then and lots of potato, and then you shred a dill pickle, and you add the shredded dill pickle, and then you basically season it with dill pickle brine rather than salt. And then you dice dill pickles into like a fine mince, and then you use it to garnish the top. And it is the closest thing I can think of calling it. It tastes a bit like a sour cabbage soup, which is delicious.
I'm like salivating just hearing about this thing.
I'm gonna have to talk to my mom about why we've never indulged in this pickle soup before.
Yeah, I asked my friend Susanna about it, one of my best friends, and she was like, oh yeah, we had that growing up, but it was terrible. I hated it more than anything. And apparently her family's version of dill pickle soup was literally just, they didn't bother shredding it. It was just like a pickle in the soup. And I was like, that does not sound appealing on a culinary or a visual level, really.
Maybe my mom has similarly traumatic experiences with pickle soup, and that's why we've never had it.
Just a massive kosher dill floating in the middle of a pot of chicken soup. It's just like, how'd that end up there?
I bet it tastes similar to like a kimchi soup. My wife made kimchi soup recently, and it was outstanding. But I mean, kimchi's just pickled cabbage, basically.
Yeah.
It's spicy. Yeah. It was good.
I mean, it was delicious. Don't get me wrong. It was strangely delicious. It was the delicious where I was like eating it and I was like, this shouldn't work. But it did. It did. This had nothing to do with Christmas. But hey, why don't we move on now from slaying our holidays to slaying the princesses?
Well played. That transition, though.
First transition of 2024, and I feel that it was pretty on brand for what the rest of 2024 is going to be. So, Jerry, you reviewed Slay the Princess, and surely this is a typo. It's supposed to say save the princess, right? Because that's what you do in every game. In every game, the point is to save the princess.
Yeah. Yeah, you save her with a dagger.
Wow, that is very metaphorical. Okay, so this is a fascinating looking game that has been on. It's been out for a few weeks now, and kind of looks like a little bit like a storybook, which is appropriate because it's about a princess. But it is a visual novel that takes a slightly different, shall we say, tact to the classic Save the Princess scenario. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the core concept of Slay the Princess?
So it's a gameplay loop of endings. In a lot of games, especially narrative-driven games, you have this debate like, do the ends justify the means, or is it more about the journey than the ending? Let's say you get a lackluster ending, but at least the story was told pretty well up until that point. This is a unique case where the game is the endings. The process to getting the ending is also fun, but every run's going to take you about 20 to 40 minutes or so, depending on the kind of road you're taking. What you're basically doing is every time you start the game up, you wake up in the forest and your companion is the narrator, which is some omniscient being that's talking to you. And he's basically saying, go slay the princess. And then you have several dialogue options and you can say like, why would I do that? What's wrong with the princess? And then eventually he tells you, well, if you don't kill her, the world will come to an end. It's like, okay, how do you know that? And then every question you could think of is basically addressed, and they've thought about it, and they're like, okay, you eventually end up having to go to the cabin where the princess is being held, which is a very quick jaunt up the hill. And then you go into the room, and then you have the option of picking up a dagger or not picking up a dagger. You go into the room, and then you talk to the princess, and then, it's all dialogue branches. Mm-hmm. And depending on what you choose to say to her, elicits a different response from her, a different response from the narrator. So you basically have this three-way conversation going on. Princess can't hear the narrator. And then you have to decide, what do you want to do with the princess? And there are a variety of options. And the game is much, much more in-depth than just the idea of slaying the princess, because after you make these decisions, what happens next?
I mean, it sounds very, I guess, philosophical would be the right word.
Absolutely.
And also it subverts, just my joke off the top being like the point is to save the princess in every single game. It subverts that expectation just right in the title.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the hook. It leads you in. It's like, oh, we're turning this on its head a bit. And it basically just gets you in the door. And then once it gets you in the door, it becomes very philosophical. And it goes to some pretty interesting places, because whether or not you end up killing the princess, there's going to be a next chapter, and you're a new person who has to do something with the princess. And then the princess is a little bit different this time, because you're basically picking up where the last hero, quote unquote, left off. And then the game just goes from there. And it sounds like I'm spoiling a bit, but this happens within the first 15 minutes or so. And you're going to know pretty quick what the gameplay loop is. But where does that gameplay loop end up going? It does go somewhere. This is not just a game where you're just getting like, oh, cool, an ending. Oh, cool, an ending. It does have a grand closure at the end. And the closure at the end isn't necessarily like the end. It kind of leaves things open-ended.
Well, I like that you compare the endings in this game to something else that most games offer nowadays, which is collectibles. Everything's a collectathon. Mm-hmm. So you kind of say that the collectibles in this game are the endings.
Yeah. as much as I love a lot of traditional RPGs where like you fight a secret boss or whatever and you get a really cool weapon, it's like, I just beat the hardest boss in the game. Why do I need a better sword? That doesn't make any sense. And like these random MacGuffins all over the place, like find the package or, you know, save all bunnies or whatever it is. This is kind of like, okay, cool. I like finding stuff. I guess that's kind of neat. But this game is like the endings, and there's so many endings, and you cannot get all of the endings in one playthrough, which might entice you to do another playthrough. Now, the cool thing about this game is you might be thinking there's so many different ways the dialogue can spider out. What if I accidentally get the same ending and I just have to like click through all the dialogue again? What a headache that is. The game is built so that you cannot get the same ending twice. So like those dialogue options just will not be available to you. They'll be missing and you won't even really realize it just because the game's constantly giving you like 5 or more dialogue options.
I wouldn't even say that's a quality of life feature. I just say that is a smart design choice to make.
It seems like common sense, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there have been a lot of... I understand this game isn't really a time loop game, but there have been a lot of time loop games of the last couple of years where, yeah, you kind of fall into the habit of, you know, getting the same ending over and over again. I'm glad they figured out a way to narratively subvert that.
And it doesn't seem hard either. So take note, visual novel developers.
Yes, true. I mean, you recently, well, not recently, before Christmas had an experience with a visual novel style game that was quite a bit like that, where it was, you did fall into a lot of the same endings, and it became very repetitive. That was World of Horror, I believe.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That was on a previous podcast. But that's an art game where like the ending's the same and it's kind of like rolling your eyes and all that, but the journey is more what that game's about. It's like a cool new thing you see. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of cool new things you can see. I think it's a game that's meant to be played in 5 hours, not 15 hours. Whereas this game, I think you could play in 5 hours, and depending on how interested you are in finding the different endings or collectibles, if you want to call them that, you can definitely dive right back in. The problem with diving right back in after you get the quote unquote big ending is that you might end up getting repetitive endings again.
Okay. You mentioned the narrator. To me, it seems like the presence of a narrator sets the game up for some fourth wall meta experimentation with narrative. Is that the case here, or is it played pretty straight with the narrator?
It's played pretty straight. There's very little fourth wall breaking, if any. Certainly not in the endings I found.
Okay, so we're not in like, I don't know if you played it, but we're not in like the Stanley Parable area.
Oh, I love Stanley Parable.
Oh, it is not that game. Okay.
You're kind of arguing with this omniscient being. I mean, you could almost call it God, I guess. But, you know, who is the narrator? What is the narrator? Maybe you could find that out. I don't know.
It will depend on which choices you make, I guess, which is the point of a visual novel. And it sounds like the game's writing especially creates a very, I guess, immersive, but also heightened experience in the sense that there are a lot of stakes here. I mean, right off the top, just the name of the game, Slay the Princess, being a subversion of the expectation, that raises the stakes immensely.
Yeah. You're kind of like laying the groundwork for high expectations. Like, okay, so you're going to, twist this narrative a bit. Okay, impress me. Do something more than just, the surface level, save the princess versus slay the princess thing.
Yeah, right off the top, we're dealing with questions of life and death, and the consequences of your actions in what seems to be, based on what I've read, a longer term thing. Like if you don't slay the princess, the world will end. I haven't played the game, so I don't know if that's true or not, but it feels like there are a lot of dark choices that you can make here.
Yeah, and there's a lot of grays here. So like, kill the princess, don't kill the princess. Seems pretty black and white. And out of the gate, yeah, that's your black and white decision. But as you start talking to the narrator, you start asking some whys or some hows, and how do you know this, or why do you want me to do that, and where were you a year ago, and what are you going to do after I do this? And it starts spidering out into more moral grays where you're just like, okay, let's assume you're right. Let's assume the world will end if I don't do this. So you're making this sound like a good option. Why don't you do it? And things like that. So you start trying to address things in roundabout ways, and you start trying to justify even yourself as a player. Like, is it by my own hand? It's almost like the trolley problem. It's like, okay, if I let the trolley go, it'll kill 5 people. But if I, turn lever, it'll kill one person. What is the morally correct thing to do? It kind of has you in that place, which is why this works so well as like a video game and not a book. And this is part of the reason why video games are great at storytelling, is because like you're the player, you're making the decision. Yeah, the protagonist is, and that's who that would be in a book you were reading. But you as a player, you've got to decide if you're going to pull the lever on that trolley. And even when you talk to the princess, not just the narrator, you're also talking to the princess. And is she a princess? Is she who she claims to be? Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. And I think it does a great job of putting the player in a position where you really have to question your own ethics.
Well, that's the interesting thing about visual novels in comparison to, well, like you said, reading a book. There's no such thing as reader agency when you're reading a book, unless I guess it's a really complex, interesting book. I don't know, House of Leaves or something like that experiments with narrative. But for the most part, when you read a book, you're reading it and you're casting yourself in these roles and you're feeling the things, but you're a passive reader. Whereas with a visual novel, yeah, it tells a story, a complex story with some excellent writing, but you have agency in developing that story, and there are consequences to your choices. And it sounds like this game is inherently built around the consequence of your choices. Again, right there in the title. What do you do?
Yep. Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so interesting, is because even with a lot of other visual novels, you're for the most part on rails. Like you think of Steins Gate, what an amazing tale that is. But for the most part, you're kind of just reading a book on the computer. There's very little choices you have. You can get different endings and stuff depending on how you talk to people. But a lot of that game is just strictly just reading, clicking through the prompts. This game is almost entirely forks. You decide this, you decide this, you decide that, and that crafts the story. And the cool thing is not just the ending, but this game goes into some wild places. Like I don't really want to spoil any of the endings, but you're going to be going to all sorts of places. And what happens to the princess, what happens to the narrator, what happens to the place you visit every time when you get a new loop in the gameplay cycle, it's always going to be somewhere outlandish. And that's part of the addictive quality of it, is like, I could do anything and it could go absolutely anywhere.
How does the gameplay work in this game in terms of, I know it's a visual novel, so it's primarily choice-based, but how is it presented?
I mean, it's dialogue options in the top right of the screen. So you scroll down and you can see a whole bunch of issues. The one big complaint I have about this game is if you don't know to access the accessibility features, which is in the options, which you have to go through a variety of menus just to get to it, it's going to be very taxing to go through all the dialogue options, because sometimes you're going to have like more than 10 options and the text is really big and you're going to have to scroll. And the way it scrolls is it kind of speeds by. So you might think, oh, what if I missed one? And sometimes the new dialogue option is nested in between two older options or between 5 different dialogue options. So you could get lost. Like, okay, I want to keep following this tree. Where's my new dialogue option? That's a quality of life feature this game desperately needs. But what I would suggest to new players, if you're thinking about picking this up, is first thing you do when you load this up, go into the accessibility menu, find it. Don't do anything until you find it. Make the text smaller. It's going to make your life so much easier and make the game more enjoyable, because having to sift through all this white text on a scroll wheel that's large, you're going to get lost and you're going to get frustrated.
I can see that, like it's cut off there. You have some screenshots in the review, and it's cut off on the 4th option.
Yeah.
So you'd have to scroll down for there. That is frustrating. Yeah, I can see how. And the accessibility option to make the text smaller is a way to deal with that, but it seems like it would be a fairly easy UI. It's a UI issue.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, just like a little clickable in the top left, you're not going to miss anything. If a little, adjust the, have a little magnifying glass or something, you could adjust the size of the text. I mean, this game is not a technical marvel by any stretch of the imagination. It's pretty bare bones. It is what you see it is. It relies almost completely on the writing. The visuals are also quite good. If you're into the art style, it's kind of sketchy, not like shady sketchy, but like it's like hand drawn.
I was about to say that you're playing a lot of games with black and white graphics lately.
Yeah, which is fine. It's just kind of my thing. I'm actually, Sepia is really cool. Road Warden, I'm just gonna name drop that game again. That is a beautiful game. I recommend that to anyone. Another great narrative driven game. But in this game, like it is entirely the writing. So it's indie in that sense. Like you're not getting any bells and whistles. There's no cool, like, menus to navigate. There's no animations or visuals that are going to awe strike you. But if you look at some of the screenshots that are on the website, I mean, this is beautiful black and white hand drawn stuff. And it doesn't look all that elaborate, but so much is told with this very simple art style. And I think that's also something that needs to be praised is there's a lot of personality and character in the simplistic. A lot of modern games will rely on, the very technical graphics, lots of polygons, things like that, ray tracing, all that, which, has its place. And those are absolutely fantastic games to look at. But a simple style like this, just still images that you could tell someone, labored over with a pencil is there's so much charm there.
Well, that's exactly the word I would use, actually, charm. It's like I said off the top, it looks like a fairy tale. It looks like a storybook, which is obviously riffing on the idea of the princess. And I like how the very central conceit of the game subverts the art style in the sense that, storybooks usually have happy endings because they're fairy tales. Well, if they're written by Disney anyway. Whereas this, your first screenshot has the princess dead, obviously for a long time on the ground. So clearly happy endings are, I guess happy endings are your decision to make. How does replayability come in here? Because obviously I really enjoy visual novels as a genre, but not a lot of replayability in a lot of visual novels, because once there are obviously different paths to take, but once you've seen most of them, that's kind of the end of that. What about this game? I
mean, it's the endings, right? It's the collectathon with the endings. And then you'll get a big ending, but you could get a different big ending depending on the choices you made. Again, I'm so tempted to spoil it. I will not spoil. But the big ending is really satisfying and cool because all of your decisions up to that point lead to this big outcome. And you're just left wondering, what if I did things a little bit differently? What would this big ending have been? So it's not just the sum of its parts. It's not just, this big ending you're getting at the end. It's also like, okay, I get to see this cool little thing, what happens to the princess, and I know it's going to lead somewhere grander, and it's really going to make me say, WTF, what is even happening? What is going on? I'm confused, but I'm also very curious. That's another important thing about this game is it on the surface, kill the princess, don't kill the princess. It seems kind of mindless, right? Yeah. But it lures you in, and before you know it, you're having philosophical questions, and this writing is so well done. You're left just wondering, oh my God, what have I done with existence and all this other stuff? So it's really playable if you want to put in the time to get all the different endings. But once you get the big ending, you have to be careful with the choices you make in the next playthrough, because you could accidentally get the same ending you got before, which is kind of a bummer.
Obviously the visual presentation is what really catches your eye here, but I'm curious about the audio in this. You mentioned that the voice acting is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think part of that's because it's a small cast. So I'm not an expert on developing games or anything like that, but I feel like the less voices you got to capture, you can afford to hire some better talent. And then, you don't have 8 voice actors and 5 of them are great and the other 3 kind of bog things down. This is just everyone's doing their job well. And the narrator absolutely steals the show. Every line he delivers is fantastic. He's a joy to interact with. And the music is great too. I listen to it on my Spotify account. It's on my playlist. And every time it comes up, I remember the game, and I'm always smiling. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. It brings me back to, that particular ending I got, which actually, depending on the endings you get, the game will develop a soundtrack for you. Ooh. Based on your playthrough. So it gives you a link at the end. It's like, okay, these are all the songs that you were able to access in your playthrough. Here's your playlist. Enjoy. So you could cheat, obviously, and just listen to all the tracks on the Spotify account online, or you could just use the link and access your songs, which adds a little more personality to it. It makes it more personalized as part of your journey.
I like that. Adaptive difficulty is nice, but adaptive soundtracks, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And again, it's a simple idea, but I don't see anyone else doing it.
Yeah, it sounds like they're doing a few things here. Obviously, the presentation is very simple. The black and white, almost pencil sketch storybook drawings. On the surface, this does not look like a complex game, but the flow chart that must have been required to map out the branches and the forks in this thing must be immense. And it sounds like they really put in the work when it comes to the audio design as well.
Yeah, and actually, I got to give a lot of credit to the developer, because back when Neverwinter Nights was like the new thing, I actually messed with that dialogue editor, and I was making my own scripts for little scenarios I was doing. And it is mentally taxing to just keep everything straight, put in the right flags, like, okay, this spider's out here, but it can also lead to this thing. It is, I wouldn't call it a chore, but you really got to be aware of what you're doing and make sure everything's cohesive and makes sense. So the fact that it's done so well here, because in a lot of games it's not always done this well. You'll get accidental repeats, or you'll get like dialogue loops where like you end up in a circle, like, oh, they messed up here. I didn't see any of those in this game. So it's absolutely well designed, and they take everything into consideration, not just the writing, but also the music, and make sure the music fits that particular ending. So you get music that's very similar stylistically, but depending on what ends up happening, you'll get music that is catered towards that kind of outcome. Again, trying to avoid spoilers here, but it is a unique experience, and it feels unique to you. So you and I could play the game and get entirely different endings and have a lot to chew on if we wanted to talk about it, just because like, oh, I didn't think to do that. I wonder why that led to that and all this other stuff. So if you're playing this with a friend, there's so much to chat about.
That's interesting to know, because this might be a fun game to play, quote unquote, with Amanda.
Yeah.
I'm just going through their website right now. Black Tabby Games is the developer. And this is, first off, hey, I didn't actually realize, apparently it's Canadian. Apparently the developers live in Toronto. That doesn't mean that they're Canadian, but I'm gonna take it as Canadian. And there are two developers, and they are a husband-wife team. So two people.
And what a team they are.
Yeah, two people. And are responsible for this. And there's another game coming out. I guess part of it already came out, called Scarlet Hollow. Yeah, it's episodic. The first two parts are out already.
Dom's been reviewing it, yeah.
Yeah. But I guess more is coming out soon. And it's a very, very pretty looking art style.
It's definitely different. Like, you could tell it's similar, but it's got more color to it, for one. And it's got a lot more people in it. It loses some of that sketchy flair, but it does look beautiful. It's very well detailed, and it's well received so far. Yeah, Dom seems to like it.
Yes. Well, one of the things that you say in this, which for you, this game almost reaches legendary status. You say you still gave it an editor's choice, which I actually approve of. It's funny. I think some people think the editor's choices are only for games that are over a 90. I disagree with that on every level. I think editor's choices need to be very specific to whoever the reviewer is. Like, whatever the score, it doesn't matter. If the reviewer loves it, they can give it an editor's choice. Similarly, I don't necessarily feel like every game above a 90 should get an editor's choice award.
Yeah. I've reviewed quite a few games over a 90 I've not given editor's choice to. Yeah. And this is actually maybe my first 80s game I gave an editor's choice to. I gave this one an 88. And I agree with you. I think, it's very personal to the editor. The reason I gave it to this game is so unique. Like, I put a premium on innovation. If you could do something creative outside the box and do it well, this game does it certainly well enough. I think it deserves recognition. Which is why some games above a 90 don't get the editor's choice, because, if they're just kind of rinse and repeating what a lot of other people have done, it's like, you made an excellent game, just doesn't really move the medium forward. I think this is a game that can move the medium forward. It's certainly an exemplar of good dialogue options and good writing and good use of collectibles. It does enough things superbly well that I wanted to give it the recognition it deserves.
And I'm glad you did. And I think it deserves it from the sounds of it. As a reviewer, what would you say is the most compelling reason to play Slay the Princess?
I mean, it's very unique to the person, which is part of the reason I gave it an 88, not like a 90 or higher, is because I don't think this is a game for everyone. And for me, a 90 plus game is a game that I think 99% people out there would enjoy.
Hmm.
It got an 80 because, some people just aren't into the indie stylings. This doesn't have a lot of modern furnishings. And really, it is all about the writing. It is all about the philosophy. And if you're not like, if you're more into the action RPG stuff, and I'm into that too, but if that's like solely your genre, you may not like this as much. And I think you kind of know that just looking at the game. This is what it looks like. It is text on the screen, good voice acting, a lot of dialogue options. If you're into a more cerebral experience, this is for you. If you want something that's different, something that's going to get you thinking, questioning your own ethics and beliefs, this is absolutely for you. I can think of no better game sitting here right now than this game.
I think that they should appeal to that action RPG audience. They should just make this into a Souls-like.
Yeah.
Every single time you enter into this place with the princess, she has a different, like every fight, every single time you have to kill the princess is a different boss fight with completely different patterns. That actually is that's not the worst idea I think I've ever said out loud, used about.
Well, maybe that's the game.
Yeah.
Maybe you should play the game, Jono.
Maybe it's an emotional Souls-like. Oh, that's a fun idea. I like that. I like that a lot. Aleks, do you have anything you would like to ask about Slay the Princess?
Yeah, Slay the Princess sounds awesome, and I like was eyeing it for a while now, and I haven't checked it out yet. But I love like games with like interesting different choices to offer, and especially ones that have that sort of philosophical vibe where like you're almost being addressed on like a meta level as a player. I love games that do tricks like that, so I'll almost certainly be checking it out at some point.
Well, if you're pursuing a doctorate in narrative design or level design or video games and how they change us, if you're that kind of person, Aleks,
I sure am.
I think
if you're that kind of person,
probably something that should go in a textbook.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds awesome. I can't wait to check it out. How long does it take per like playthrough?
Oh, I mean, every ending is pretty bite-sized. We're talking like no more than 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
It's snappy. And then you get one ending, you just stop playing, and you go do whatever it is you got to do. You can come back, do another 20 minutes or so. So it's as long as you want it to be though, because you could be pretty exhaustive with some of the dialogue options. It just depends on the tree you go, but it would never be more than 40 minutes for an ending.
Wow, unreal. That's a really unique and cool format for a game to follow.
Especially nowadays, people are liking smaller games, so it kind of like fills that niche as well.
Oh, small games are so good.
I certainly love small. Yeah, when I look up how long to beat and I see something under 10 hours, it is not detracting at all. That is a selling point for me nowadays.
Yeah. For us old people, yeah.
And it's not just a matter of that. There is a genuine, at least for me, I keep track of every single game that I play. And yeah, 110-hour games are great. But in the time it takes me to play 110-hour game, I could see the numbers go up by like 5 or 6 games if for little tiny ones. And numbers get higher on my games completed in 2024 list. Always feels good.
Well, I think when you get a shorter game, you know that there's no filler. There's no fluff. I think when you're playing a game that, goes past 20 hours, there's a risk that there's padding. There's a risk that, it's not all meaningful quality content. They're kind of just like, they're going for the crowd that wants quantity, not necessarily quality. But if this game's less than 5 hours, you could be pretty sure if it's a good game, it's all good.
Well, thank you very much, Jer, for coming on and talking about Slay the Princess. Yeah, I mean, having you on the show is always a delight, Jerry. And I think we're going to move on now to a game that is, okay, Slay the Princess seems like it is narratively complex, but at least it seems like it is somewhat, you can explain it to me and I go, oh, that I understand this narrative structure. Planet Laika, which is a game that Aleks brought to me. I've read your review several times. I've read the Wikipedia article. I've watched a little bit on YouTube, and I am still baffled by this thing. It might be one of the strangest things I've... Okay, well, let's break it down a little bit. So, before we start everything, one of my favorite things in the whole world with working at RPG Fan is when someone brings something to me that I've never heard of before. I like to have I have an open door policy about pitching me reviews, and it's if you have an idea for a game that you want to review, bring it to me. We'll talk about it. Alex, you brought to me a game called Planet Laika. And you mentioned that it had a recent fan translation. The fan translation was released in 2022. It was obviously never released in the West. I didn't need any more convincing aside from that because it sounded fascinating. And you mentioned Quintet. And I think looking at this game and reading your review, I think I have a fairly clear picture of why this game was never localized for the West. And probably never will be. But let's talk about the development team behind this. So most people listening to this podcast are probably very familiar with Quintet. Quintet was a remarkably innovative and creative Japanese action RPG developer on the Super Nintendo system. They developed ActRaiser, which was a wonderful hybrid of a side-scrolling action game and a city builder at a time when hybrid games like that didn't really exist. They also had an action RPG trilogy for the SNES, two of which we got here and one of which we didn't. Soul Blazer and Illusion of Gaia are probably very familiar to everyone out there. Terranigma probably is familiar.
I played
too,
the whole
but not
thing, and I'm
necessarily
still
because you played it,
baffled
but
by it.
because here in the far West we never got it. It was given a European localization release, which I think drives all of us crazy and makes Alana giggle because Alana missed a lot of games, but Europe got this one. And then, for a lot of people at that point, that was Quintet's golden age. Those are the games when you think Quintet. And after that, they went on to some licensed games. They really kind of lost their individual voice. But it turns out they didn't lose their individual voice. They just, pardon the expression, I think they just blew all of their individual voice on Planet Laika. What is this?
And probably never will be.
Yes. Yes, please tell us the simplest version of the plot you possibly can. This game is Planet Aleks now.
Yeah, good question. So it's I guess ostensibly an adventure game in the way it kind of plays, and just like its overall like gameplay mechanics and the way you move about the world. I guess first I should maybe explain the premise of the story and kind of how that leans into the gameplay. But so basically. So basically, you begin the game with a crew of astronauts. You control one of the astronauts named Laika, although you also get to name your character. So there's immediately some sort of disconnect of just like, okay, is my character Laika or is my character the name I just gave them? Yes, exactly. But you're sent on a mission to Mars. You're a bunch of astronauts. and you're basically sent on a mission to investigate the emergence of this force called Evil Mind, which is starting to spread out throughout Mars, which has been colonized by humans, and the Martians that have been there have been eradicated. And also, this Evil Mind force is starting to seep its way into Earth and affecting the way humans exist and feel and live their lives. Also, by the way, the thing that made the Martians extinct is that the humans gave them their faces. The exact conflict between the Martians and humans is pretty vaguely explained. It's not really certain whether the Martians were initially hostile, whether the humans were initially hostile, or what exactly happened in the lore of this world. But once humans gave Martians their faces, the Martians immediately became extinct. And there was this basically giant face built on Mars in supplication to humans and human identity and human faces. And that's where this force called Evil Mind is coming from. So Evil Mind is somehow stemming from the extinction of the Martians. Whether it's a genocide or what have you, it's not completely clear, but that seems to be what's implied. And so now humans are dealing with the consequences of this kind of psychologically. And they also now have dog faces, by the way. So all the actual characters in the game, whether it's the astronauts, whether it's the like colonists on Mars, they all look like dogs, like humanoid bipedal dogs. So that's an interesting little aesthetic twist. So basically, once you land on Mars, you start pursuing your mission, which is to find why Evil Mind is happening, which seems to be connected to a previous mission where an astronaut went to Mars and started thinking that he was a god. He started becoming delusional, and that's kind of where you're investigating this whole thing with your crew. But very quickly into the game, within the first hour, as you're exploring the first couple screens on Mars, your crewmates start having these little psychological episodes, including Laika also.
Boring.
The Evil Mind immediately starts affecting everybody.
No, I want this is memories. Please continue.
Of both yourself and your crewmates. A lot of trauma starts emerging. You're taken to like a bunch of kind of like weird visual episodes, and also like accompanied by like really jarring audio accompaniments, and it just creates this very almost like horror-esque atmosphere, along with kind of the adventure gamey gameplay you're doing. So that's kind of the main setup. When the game really starts taking off once you reach the main kind of hub of the game, which is called the Colony, which is basically where most of the residents on Mars now are. And it's like looks really kind of like run down. It looks like it was kind of like an old prison. There's like a bunch of like rusted buildings and dilapidated interiors and things like that. All the characters you meet are kind of strange. You start kind of trying to you lose track of all your crewmates, and so your mission is now to as Laika alone find out what happened to the previous captain that came to Mars, find out the source of Evil Mind, and try to track down your crewmates. And the other kind of main twist here, which is kind of where the main adventure gamey puzzle-esque mechanics come in, is that Laika actually is not a single person, but is actually a conglomeration of 3 different personalities. Yeah, feel free to stop me if you have any questions at any point, by the way. So there's 3 main types of evil that are all associated with a color. So, and each of these evils is tied to one of Laika's personas. So all these personas are represented as their own characters kind of within Laika's mind. And once you gather enough of that type of evil by either interacting with NPCs associated with the same type of evil. So when you approach kind of one of the NPCs in the game, you'll start like kind of emitting a color from Laika, and so that just tells you what type of evil they're associated with. So then you talk to them, and then your evil points for that type go up. So the red evil
It's
is
times
tied
like
to
this I kind of
like
wish that
power or wrath.
podcasting was a more
The
visual
green
medium
evil
so
is
the
tied
audience
to
can see
like
the look on my
desire,
face right
envy,
now, or more
and the
accurately,
blue
the look on
evil
my
is tied to
face
knowledge or pride.
as
So
the
there's a lot of
gears
kind
were
of
slowly
the
turning in
seven
my head as you were
Christian
telling me the plot
sins
of
tied
this
to that.
game.
So
Desperately
Quintet's
trying
love of
My
Judeo-Christian
God,
symbolism is
David
back
Lynch
and
would be
running in
appalled by
full force
this.
here. And
Um,
so once you have enough of a type of
I
evil, you can
I
go to
see,
a
as someone
mirror,
who actually
and basically
believes that the plot of
Laika
Twin
has like
Peaks
a
makes
little bit
sense,
of
well,
an
maybe not
episode,
season
and then
3, but
transforms
most of the plot of
fully
Twin Peaks makes
into
sense.
their persona tied to that evil.
This
So
is
Ernest is the red persona,
madness. Like, people
Yolanda
talk
is the
about the
green
big
persona, and
swing
Spacer's the blue
that
persona, and they're all kind of represented as
developers took
completely
on the
individual
PlayStation
characters
for their
who
first games,
have their
where
own
they
personalities
brought in
and can
3D
speak,
graphics
whereas
and the sound
Laika
was
is a
better, and they were
completely
doing all
silent
of these things.
protagonist who
It seems
doesn't
like
have much
Quintet
of a
said, "Okay, we're
personality
going to do
at
that,
all in
but
their interactions
also
with characters."
you aren't going to believe what we're
So
going to be
from there,
doing
you
with the
kind of
story."
have to use
This
the different
feels, based on
personalities
what you
to
told me, and
solve
looking
like
at the game as
progression
well,
uh,
this
like
feels to
blocks,
me
and
more like an
from there,
indie
that's
game
kind of
from
how the game
today
works.
than it
That's
does
the basic
than it
kind of
does a
adventure game
PlayStation
mechanic. Most of the time, you're just talking to the different residents of
release
the
era in
colony.
1999.
The game moves fairly
Like,
fast in terms
you know
of its
how
progression. There's clearly like
simplistic
a lot
polygon
of different
graphics are
things
starting to come
happening
back
with
in the
the
same way that
characters in the
pixel art did
colony.
when the NES generation
And they're
grew
all like
up,
kind
and
of
then the
really
Super Nintendo generation
compelling,
grew up,
all
and we
very
really got
like
into pixel art.
idiosyncratic
Over the last few years,
dialogue, and just like a completely
basic
chaotic,
polygon
weird vibe the game
PlayStation,
is going for.
Nintendo
If that wasn't
64
clear
style,
already.
and Saturn, I guess. Of course,
Yeah,
Saturn.
that's
Art
does
has
that
really
answer
started to
the
flourish
gist of
again.
it?
This would not seem out of place. Like, if I saw a game like this on the Steam store, I would be like, yeah, that looks interesting. It's, I don't even, personality, imagination. I'm not even sure what kind of effort would be required to create this kind of plot. And I do not mean this in a negative way, by the way, not even slightly. I'm
yeah, very very Lynchian in
game.
nature for sure.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like it's a very different narrative style than, frankly, a lot of other Quintet games. I mean, yes, Terranigma, from my understanding, is a little bit more experimental in the way the plot unfolds, and it deals with some very significant themes of. I believe there's quite a bit of spirituality and religion in there as well. But Illusion of Gaia and Soul Blazer are much more conventional action RPG narratives. Whereas this, well, I mean, this isn't actually an action RPG, really. I guess it sort of is. The battle system is weird, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like just like the way it looks, and the way that kind of like dialogue progresses, and the way that like the visuals and audio accompany each other, like it's all just extremely creative, and always like just like, if you're the person who kind of likes to interpret like the fiction that they're engaging with, if you're a David Lynch fan, then this has like so much like constant food for thought for you. Mm. There is a battle system, after all, on top of the adventure game elements, but it is not just a regular kind of turn-based battle system that you'd find in most JRPGs of the PS1 era. So it actually kind of works in more of an arcadey sense. So you encounter enemies on the map. They're called phases. They're kind of manifestations of that evil mind force. And sometimes when you're exploring different parts of Mars, you'll encounter a screen where they appear. If you approach them, you will enter a separate battle screen. But again, it's not what you'd normally expect. Instead, you have the current persona you're playing as on the left side of the screen, and then you have the phase on the right side of the screen, and it starts shooting these evil mind bullets at you, which are basically sent at your character to whittle down their psyche, basically your HP in this game. So in order to combat these evil mind bullets, you have this thing called a mind core just moving up and down in front of your character, and you press the action button to push the mind core forward. And basically what you want is to, with that momentum in mind of your mind core, try to make contact with the bullets being shot at you.
RPGs.
So you push the mind core forward, try to make contact with bullets as you're moving forward, and then you can hit the cancel button
style
to
thing,
recall your mind
really
core all the way back
choice.
to
I guess they put
character.
most of their focus of this game on the
as you're getting recalled back, you can make contact with any mind bullets you may have lost,
the visual
because you don't have
because
total
the visual
control
design
of
this
the mind
thing
core. So it actually ends up being quite fun.
Crazy.
Like,
it's nuts.
I had a lot of fun with the battles in these games.
So unique,
I guess my one
again when you compare it to Quintet's earlier works,
once you get the gist of how it
very much fit into
the a bit too easy.
Super Nintendo pixel art.
There aren't too many battles
genre,
in the game,
which is beautiful. Like the pixel art of maybe not Soul Blazer, but the pixel art of certainly Illusion of Gaia. And
I was looking forward to each one. I just wish there was more of a challenge, especially later in the game. You get these really interesting,
this game
well-presented boss fights that I
like
wish
I said, it looks like
that are pretty epic actually in the narrative.
An interpretation of a PlayStation game today, but the character designs, everything from the dog faces to the
and on top of just like the regular evil mind pellets that are shot, there are also like tiny pellets that are shot very quickly that can be one of two kinds.
Again, I can see why this
one of them
was
is
not
like
localized,
a little recovery, so it's the only way you can heal mid-battles,
at least the localizers,
to make contact with these recovery
from this
bullets.
period in time,
and the
would have
other
known what to make of this.
Type of special pellet basically is a screen clear. Like, you hit it and then it sends all of the bullets back at the enemy. So those are like, when you see them, like, you really want to make sure that you make contact with them. So really unique battle system, unlike and any other really. I wish they did a bit more with it, but
there's a reason why
Quintet
did not make this on the Nintendo 64. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, amazing! Yeah.
Well, I guess the inspiration of this game would have been, it's right in the name, Planet Laika. So for those listening who don't know, Laika was the first dog in space, one of the first mammals in space. The Russians sent Laika into Earth orbit, and with the
that's for
with the certainty
and,
that Laika
just
wasn't
on top
coming
of
back,
like the subject matter
because they
that
hadn't yet
touches
figured
on
out how
things
to
genocide,
Earth's atmosphere
abuse,
at this point. So they sent poor Laika up to see,
some of
to see even if a mammal could survive.
I don't know, stories
Earth,
of the NPCs are actually like very
so Laika was the first dog in space. They actually the story is told in season 2 of For All Mankind, a Apple TV show that is
absolutely
just fantastic. If
yeah,
you've seen
otherwise,
it. It's a
like the visual
story
design,
about,
like I mean,
what if the Russians got to
looks
the moon first?
Spectacular.
And
like the actual game
because
world
of that,
itself,
the Americans are like,
it's
oh hell
comparable
no!
to,
So it actually super
like a Final
energizes
Fantasy
the space
VIII or like a
race
Resident
in a way
Evil
that it
with its
obviously
use
didn't
of
in our
kinda
reality.
still
But it's a
screen,
terrific show, and it's a great
pre-rendered
alternate history.
backgrounds, fixed camera
And
angles,
there is a scene
makes great
in the second
evocative
season
use
where
of those.
we meet some
But the real
cosmonauts, and they
highlights
tell us
are
about
when
Laika.
you're in,
And it's very, very sad and
specifically
tragic.
important.
So the fact that they
story
are
conversations
taking the
with the different
inspiration of that
NPCs,
and
you
then
get these like
slapping dog
really
faces
weird
on all of the
renders,
humans, I guess
like,
you could
with, like,
say it
faces
is
or,
like an
eyeballs
homage
or
to
colors.
humanity's first sin of
And then you
space
just
travel.
have like your characters talking like on top of them, as like music is like changing according to like how the conversation's evolving. It's just like an absolute trip, and it can make like a 2-minute conversation just feel like just like a profound kind of narrative development that you can kind of, just food for thought. And yeah, really, really interesting stuff if that sounds appealing to you. Mm.
Obviously, the visual nature of the game is quite eye-catching, but what is the sound like? I mean, it's obviously working off a PlayStation era sound chip, so I suspect it is not. It is a step above Super Nintendo, but not what we would expect today. But considering the incredible, almost absurdist atmosphere of this game, what is the audio design like?
Yeah, I mean that's a nice way to put it. Otherwise, like there aren't too many connections. It seems to be implied that like the astronauts are Russians. Like yeah, they have like a lot of like Russian names and things like that. But otherwise, there aren't too many actual narrative connections with the story, other than I guess the fact that this character like has a pretty tragic fate, turns out. But that's all kind of like slowly revealed throughout the game, in an interesting way. And I guess like in comparison to Quintet's earlier work, which is usually narratively very world driven, this one's a bit different in that it's extremely character driven. Like obviously there's a lot of other stuff going around with like the colonization of Mars and the history with the Martians, but ultimately like this is the Laika show, and you're here to figure out what's wrong with this character. What is their background? How do they connect to what you're seeing in this world? Is this like, the game is called Planet Laika, so it's like you're kind of left to think like, is this actually like happening, or is this just about like exploring the psychology of this character? And yeah, there's a lot of surprises and interesting turns to be experienced.
What I find very interesting about this game, obviously, like I said, was not localized. I can see why. But the version that you are playing is a fan translation, and fan translations are an interesting phenomenon. We had a whole episode of Retro Encounter on essential fan translations, which I was.
It's
really,
weird.
so
It's all over the place. There's like tons of different kind of flavors
one of the
of tracks.
Things
like
that one of the things that really
music
makes me
that
think
plays like when you're in the
deeply
colony
about fan
is kind of
translations
this, like,
is how I guess when the company localizes a game,
like
when
almost
they
like a
obviously they
jazzy
hire a
little
localizer,
tune,
they are the ones they
kind
read the
of
entire script,
has like
and
a
they
bit
make
of, like,
sure
a mystery,
that
element
localization,
that plays
that
into, like,
interpretation
trying
of the
to
story
characterize like what the hell is going
in
on in this
alignment
colony.
with what they want to present.
But then it can get
and they
like
may
really
change
weird
certain
from there,
things
like
because of
even
cultural
going out
context,
so far
or
as to
because
be
it
like
doesn't quite work in English versus
like
Japanese.
weird vocal
In the case
chants
of a
that
fan
are almost like
translation,
horror-esque an
The
atmosphere.
fan has to make those decisions,
like,
the translator.
yeah,
And
kind of
though
more
they are
horror-esque
can
elements in
be
the instrumentation,
extraordinarily
with, like,
high quality,
strings
and in
and
some
such,
cases
when like
better than the
something like
actual
particularly
translations.
weird is happening on the
Oftentimes,
screen.
fan
So
interpretation of the
even though
story
like
can tremendously
the music of
impact
this game, like it doesn't have
how
like
the story is
the
taken by the
bangers or
player. In this
excellent
particular
like
case,
orchestral
with this level of
instrumentation you'll get
absurdity
in
and
like other
symbolism
PlayStation
and, in
games
many
from
cases,
like
spirituality,
composers like Nobuo Uematsu
how would you
or
rate the
Mitsuda,
job that the localizer, the
you
fan
are getting
localizer
like
of this game,
very interesting
did?
stuff that's always well contextualized. So even though this OST, it's not something that I'd probably listen to outside of the game, within context of the game, it's virtually perfect, and it's always amplifying the mood and working with the visuals in an interesting way.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that was a great episode.
Mm. Mhm.
Hmm.
So at no point is any character like evil mind like a tiger. Okay, well, even after this conversation, watching some footage on YouTube, reading the review, I'm still baffled by the existence of this game. It is a video game that I can't imagine had a
Yeah, so
tremendous
that's
amount
a very
of
fair point,
uh,
and fan translations can
commercial
differ wildly
appeal. Like
in
this
terms of
video
quality
game
and
really does seem like
accuracy,
it
which is
was
always a harder thing
created
to
with
measure,
art
especially if you
in
don't
mind rather
know the original
than
script.
a
But
commercially
just from
acceptable
experiencing
story.
the game, like the
Although it
dialogue
does tell,
was
like you
such
said,
an
an excellent
important
story with some excellent
aspect of the enjoyment I got out
dialogue
of
and
it. So ultimately,
a lot
like
of
I
allusions
scored the
to
story of this game
Judeo-Christian
100. Because
myth
I thought it was
and
one of the
lots of
most
other things.
interesting narratives I've
But
ever
I'm
seen in a
curious,
video game, and
as
the writing was
a
just constantly like
memorable
gripping me.
and very distinct gaming
So yeah, I mean,
experience,
credits to
what
the
made Planet
translator,
Laika work for you?
Kargadin. Clearly, they must have some sort of familiarity with psychoanalytic theory, at least as much as the original writers did, to be able to get through with all the kind of nuances in terms of the word presentation, and being able to like tackle the philosophical themes in a way that feels evocative. Translating, there are also like references to like poetry, like poetry of like William Blake is referenced at some point. So I imagine that this translator is well read to be able to get through all this stuff and make it feel like it felt legit. It felt like a very well thought out and well presented script.
Let's just put it all out there.
Yeah, no little tricks like that or Woolseyisms or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of sad when you look at. I've read a little bit about Quintet and the history of Quintet, and one of the reasons why, in this age of remakes and remasters, we got a remake of ActRaiser Renaissance in 2021, but Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, and Terranigma have not, and certainly not Planet Laika. And apparently that's because not a lot of people the rights to republish the games are apparently very, very mixed
It was
up
really just came
because
down
Quintet
to everything
obviously
about
folded,
the presentation of the game, like the audio
after
visual
doing some
presentation and how
really
it matched up with the writing
forgettable
in the ways
licensed
I've been
games,
describing.
which is a
It just
absolute
made like
massive
every
tragedy, I believe,
couple minutes of this
because
game
they were doing
feel
some
like I
they were doing
constantly
something
had
that nobody
something to
else
think
was
about. I was
doing,
constantly
and I'm not
engaged.
just talking about.
And I was just staring in awe at my screen of just like the originality and
yeah,
the,
I know, and I mean, I know
here.
technically Square Enix would
like
have the rights.
This was basically,
for,
as we discussed,
Gaia
Quintet's
and
last
Terranigma. It was sold by
real
Square
creative
Enix.
effort. And
Yes, it was.
I wonder if they almost
so they were all
knew
published
it
under the
was
same
and
publisher,
had
Enix pre
kind of had no more interest in making a commercial game. They're just like, we're just going to make the most.
Theoretically, they could be released, but I don't. I don't know if they ever will be. And I sincerely doubt this will be. It's one of the reasons we only tend to review fan translations of games that probably aren't going to see an official localization.
If you want to just play a PlayStation,
I really want to thank you for bringing this one to my attention, because
makes the most
I am
of the
fascinated by
aesthetics
it.
of that
I don't think I
console,
understand it, but I am fascinated by it.
Goes all out in terms of creativity. Like, check
really,
this
really
out.
cool.
This is something special.
I completely understand. All right. Well, I really want to thank you both for coming here today and talking about these games, being here for the first episode of 2024, with two extremely unique games that are very narratively unique in very different ways, obviously. But I want to pivot for a sec to our discussion question. And last week, or 2 weeks ago, on Random Encounter, we did our Looking Ahead to 2024 episode, which I'm very proud of. I always love recording the Looking Ahead episode. It's just us geeking out about what's to come and speculating. But I wanted to ask the panel here, as a discussion question, what you are most looking forward to in video games in 2024. Now, we were talking about specifically the games that were coming out, but I wanted to know, it can be what you are looking forward to. It can be a game, or it could be like an event.
That's
it can
just
be
such a sad way to go.
Anything at all, anything that's coming out.
Yeah, uninspired licensed
Aleks,
games.
how about you? What are you most looking forward to in 2024?
Yeah, I think so. Planet Laika, also Enix published. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I played the whole thing, and I'm still not sure I understand it. So I'll probably revisit it one day, though.
Mm-mm. It's so funny how Konami has historically released some astoundingly amazing games over the years, and now they're just like, ugh, I don't want to give these people a cent. And understandably so. That being said, they have done a very good job in the last few years with their re-releases and compilations. And to their credit, they're not just money grabs. Like, they're actually doing a fairly good job of repackaging these older games in a nice shiny new wrapper and updating them and things like that. The interesting thing about this is I feel like it's halfway between a remake and a remaster. It looks like it's using the same original pixel art sprites, but it does look like it's widescreen, and they are obviously
what is probably
HD now,
my
so they're going to be redoing
greatest
the
shame
backgrounds
in
and things
terms
like
of
that.
classic RPG blind
to be honest,
spots.
the localization
is
the thing that has me the most worried, because
Suikoden 1 and 2.
Konami hasn't done this for a while. I don't think. They haven't really.
They've been on my to play list for over a decade now.
I did read that apparently they're looking at remastering Metal Gear Solid, or doing a remake of Metal Gear Solid, which I'm sure will go over perfectly with everybody being incredibly supportive, considering that they're probably not going to be,
all right, fine.
asking a certain someone
I heard
back
that
to help.
The translations were kind of the worst aspect of the original releases, so the idea of getting these games with a more proper localization, I was like, okay, I guess I can wait a couple more years. So Yeah, I mean, I'm not looking forward to giving Konami my money, but I am really looking forward to finally experiencing these games, especially 2, which is considered still widely one of the greatest RPGs of all time.
Yeah, I think it's a long road, and I think for them to redeem themselves, they're gonna have to make something new, and it's gonna have to be good. And who knows if that's ever going to happen. But in the meantime, getting these remasters is not necessarily a bad thing. So I hope that it is, for both your sake and actually more for Zach's sake than yours. I hope these are extremely good remakes. Jer, how about you?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, just this year alone, we might get remakes of slash remasters of Metal Gear Solid 3, Silent Hill 2, and Suikoden 2, which are arguably the 3 of the most beloved games Konami has ever made. So, I mean, as long as they don't completely screw any of those up, maybe they can buy back a little bit of goodwill. But it's a long road for them at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious,
Yeah.
I would say the obvious remake version of this would be to do it in HD 2D, which I don't think anyone would be upset about. Although it would look pretty much exactly like Triangle
Yeah, for
Strategy,
sure.
but I don't
These
think
games
anyone
deserve
would
it.
be upset about that either.
I mean, this is a softball for me. It is no secret that I am in love with the Final Fantasy Tactics games, specifically the original.
Mm-hmm.
And the remaster slash remake has been rumored for a
Yeah.
long time, since the Nvidia leak or whatever came out. And if I'm dreaming big, it's not a remaster; it's a remake in the same style that Final Fantasy VII remake. Not necessarily to that level. I mean, I don't think they would give that kind of budget.
Mine is,
but
actually,
I love
the
remakes.
thing
I
I'm
love
most looking forward
reimaginings.
to
I don't
in
want to play the
video
same
games
game over again. I
2024,
want
which
a
I
twist.
don't think I
want
mentioned last
something new.
week,
I want the
is
gameplay update. I want
Nintendo's
things
next console.
rebalanced. I like that sort of thing. A little twist on the story would be cool too.
I
and if
mean,
I'm really dreaming big, I would love a.
I am only 40% sure that they're going to do it. I would not be surprised if they rode the Switch train all the way into 2025.
What were they like in the,
but
the
I mean, it's done. So, it's gone, guys. You gotta.
That would be a dream.
It's not a matter of moving on
but,
I'll take this point. It's a matter of
absolutely in love with
getting
even
back in the car and driving again. I think Nintendo is spooked because they always have this thing where they have like big success kind of failure, big success kind of failure, big success kind of failure. And I think that they're a little bit worried that they might end up with another Wii U.
I'm eternal.
And I would argue that as long as they don't call Switch U,
my big game
they're going to be fine.
That got announced. I don't even need it released. I just want confirmation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, it's pretty popular. No, I mean, I cannot believe it would just be a remaster. I mean, that
maybe
game,
not.
I know War Lions they fixed the translation and all that, but it had like performance.
No more consoles. This is the last console we're going to release, and by that they don't even mean that they're going to stop developing games. We're just going to be getting Switch games for the next 20 years.
I love this game, but I can't play it like this. I know there's patches out there to fix and all that, but
I love it. I love
coat
it.
of paint. I think
I've been saying this for years that I think it's a no-brainer to call this the Super Switch, Nintendo Switch. It's
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
Answer.
And the reason why I don't think they'll do it is because they're Japanese. And that sounded racist. Let me give it some context. Their version of the Super Nintendo is the Super Famicom. They don't have the same nostalgia about the phrase Super Nintendo as we do. Whereas, honestly, if they wanted to boost sales in America, I think calling it the Super Nintendo Switch would actually boost sales, because I think that people would recognize the Super Nintendo, they made a new one. I honestly think it would work. I think it's a good name too. But who knows? It might be called the Switch Pro, might be called the, what was it? The Switch.
I mean, so I would
Switch,
say, like,
yeah.
they're a company and they're not going to be superstitious.
Yeah, I think
at the same time, data is data, right? There's a trend, right? So whatever it is with management, the executives,
this is also, I'm not taking credit for this.
or
Like, I
just
came up
your
with the
crew and
idea, but
development
I am one
burning
of
out,
many
like,
who came up with the
something
idea.
happens every other
It's
cycle.
online.
So
it's been out online
I'm sure
for a
they have
while now.
conversations
I think I said it
in-house
first
where,
on
like,
Random
okay,
Encounter like a year
why
and a
is
half
this
ago.
happening?
But
how do we
anyway,
make sure it doesn't
so
happen?
Yeah, really excited for
Because
that.
they're going to
really
need
hopeful
to do
it
a new
comes out.
console eventually.
Still 60% uncertain that it will. What is certain, however,
That's what
is
Michael
that
Pachter
you are
said.
listening
No more
to Random
consoles.
Encounter RPG
You're
Fan,
nuts.
and if you are looking for a way to support us, we have a store. You can find it at www.rpgfan.com/shop.
Yeah, maybe he'll
When
actually
you go to
raise
that
the
link, you're
price
going to see
on
two
the
links,
current
actually.
Switch.
You're going to be
That's
seeing
the
the
other
one on the right is
possibility.
going to be
Brilliant
sending
idea.
off to our merch, where you can find like t-shirts and you can find mugs and things like that. We still have some of our 25th anniversary merch left, but it's going fast. So if you want to pick some of that up, go there.
Yeah,
Ooh.
for
But
sure.
if you look over to the
Retro
left,
fans, us
you're going
30
to see something a little bit different, and that is RPG Fan's first book. If you listened to this podcast last week, you would have heard Mike talk about it a bit. It's available at Hyperplay's website. It's a collaboration with Hyperplay RPG, and it is a review card collection. Yeah. So it is a showcase of nearly 300 review cards. If you ever check our social media, you know that Steph does these incredible review cards, which are basically summaries of our reviews. We've been doing them for a few years now. And they were bound into a book, and it's a terrific book. I just got my copy. I had an advanced copy and it looked good. The real copy is way better than that even.
John, I'm not just
very impressed by it. I always get a charge at seeing my name.
I'm going to steal that and tell people
in a book because
I'm a
video game fan of the 90s. So yeah,
I think it's a brilliant idea. Like,
even
not just because I
highly recommend you buy it, but even if you don't buy
marketing.
it, I recommend you go to the site and check it out, because it's just a really cool looking thing.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and there's some great reviews in there too, and many of them are specific ones just for the book. Like, we don't have review cards for them. They were never posted. They were made specifically for this. So really, really cool thing. I know Mike is super proud of it, and he absolutely deserves to be. So absolutely check that out on the website. You can also check out some of our past episodes of Random Encounter, and if you want another look forward at 2024, you can check out our last episode, because that was our big looking ahead to 2024 episode. We are not the only podcast on the site, however. We also have Retro Encounter, which is RPG Fans' podcast of many topics that looks at retro things. And last week was our companion podcast to the Looking Ahead to 2024 episode, with Retros looking back at 2023. Really, really good episode. I was on it, had a really, really great time talking about some of our favorite games from the last year. And it's not the most recent episode. The most recent episode is talking about Super Mario RPG. So if you are a fan of that, if you played the remake a few weeks or months ago, check that episode out. We also have Rhythm Encounter, which is RPG Fans' music podcast. And I think last week was a super fun way to start the year. Mike and Hillary did something a little bit different, and they made Rhythm into a call-in radio show, which is really, really fun. So check that out. If you'd like to get in contact with us here at Random Encounter, you can fire us off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. I would absolutely love to hear from you. If you have ideas for future episode topics or discussion questions, just please fire them off. We'll talk about it on the show.
I think it is
if you'd like to send me something personal, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. You can also find me on Mastodon at johnologan@mastodon.social. I am not the only person on here with a online presence. Jerry, where can we find you online? Yes. And we're going to let that pass without comment. And Aleks, where can we find you online? Cool. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends to help us get the word out there. You can also rate us on iTunes or your other podcast players of choice. And please leave us a review. Aleks, Aleks, Jer, son of a bitch. I, what's even better than that? What's even better than, yeah, I almost got through. What's even better than that is, uh, I was looking right at your display name right here, and I was like, okay, you can't. Okay, that's not the name. You can't say Jer Bob. And then I just went with the second half instead of the first one. Ugh. Anyway, okay. Well, anyway, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. It's the first one of the new year. I think this is a really good way to get it started off. And to everyone out there listening, I hope you have a wonderful 2024. And whatever you're playing, have fun.
You can reach me at bob@rpgfan.com. That is my email address. Happy to chat with viewers or readers all the time.
Nowhere, but you can email me at alexfranachek@gmail.com. But you got to keep that in.
That was great. Right at the end. Sorry. Thanks for having me.
Bye.